Welcome back to the In the 11 podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Griffiths, and this is the show where we bring on those involved in the world of football to give you an insight into what it is like to be in the 11 at the highest level. And I am super excited to introduce and welcome Seth Alan Taylor in the 11 this week. He is a life coach and works in the mental and emotional health space for more specifically athletes and even more specifically soccer players, footballers at the highest level. He's worked with countless MLS players and players playing in Europe, and I just can't wait for you guys to hear the insights that he has, the knowledge that he has, and again, it's something I've always tried to shed light to in this podcast is mental health in sports and mental health in soccer. And Seth is the perfect person to continue to kind of drive that message home and show you guys what it is like for a top level athlete. So I don't want to give too much more away than that, but I think you guys are all going to really enjoy this one and learn a lot because I sure know that I definitely did. And without further ado, here's my chat with Seth. All right, we are joined in the 11 this week by Seth Alan Taylor, and quick shameless plug from me here at the top. For those of you a couple weeks ago who listened to the Shea episode, which is a great one, I would encourage you to go listen to it. There's a moment in there where Shea kind of talks about over his career, he's worked with some different life coaches, therapists, things like that, and it was funny when the episode came out. I got a lot of great feedback from it, and one was Seth, who was like, "Hey, man, I was that coach that he was talking about that he had done some work with, and I think it would be great if we could have a conversation to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what it actually is like for a professional player to, work with a life coach like that." So I was obviously ecstatic to be able to have him on and be able to have this conversation today. Hoping to learn a lot from you and also give some insight to our audience as well. So Seth, thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely, man. Thank you I know I shamelessly reached out to you, so I'm glad. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you for
Not at all. So if we kind of get the ball rolling here by maybe just describing a little bit of what it is that you do, and maybe we can do it kind of in the way of, as you mentioned before we got on air, a lot of what you do now is work with professional athletes, professional, footballers in the MLS. But, if you were to just meet somebody at like a dinner party or something, or, you're at a kid's sporting event and they say, "Hey, what is it that you do for work?" How would you describe what it is that you do?
Yeah, that's a great question because I've been trying to figure that out for years. Like, what's the elevator pitch? What's the thing?
Man, aren't we all?
It's a tricky one because it's evolved a lot. I mean, I worked with Shea, gosh, man, I mean, that was back in 2017, 2018, and 4 or 5 years ago. And I probably would have said something different back then, but I would say now if somebody says, "What do you do?" I'd say, I typically would say I do mental and emotional health with athletes. And that's the really short. And if they go, "Oh, really? Well, what's that all about?" What it is, I'm a therapeutic life coach for elite athletes. And that's really, and I mean, everybody needs help. Everybody, I mean, I've worked with people that aren't athletes. I have clients now that aren't athletes, but where my passion is in working with this really interesting gap, and how this gap between what players are capable of and what they actually manifest. Guys like Shea are a good example, right? You have these players that are unbelievably technically sound and incredibly athletic, and there's something on an unconscious level that is holding them back from being able to achieve what they really want to achieve. And it's been my kind of life study, to be honest with you, to try to understand that gap and then find a way to bridge it. And so, working with players like Shea and then on, over the last 5 years, working with more and more and more guys, because I just do it by referral. So someone tells somebody else. And I've come to believe that I would tell people this often. I'd say I'm trying to solve the most expensive problems in sports, because the most expensive problems in sports are all psychological. I call them psychospiritual. It actually is dealing with the psyche, with the emotions, with the spirit, with how we hold trauma. That's actually causing, the most, that is, I mean, it's a $1 billion problem. So I'm trying to solve that because, I mean, guys like Shea, you think about what he I mean, he's a really interesting one because he's just so talented. He's just so unbelievably talented. And it's not that he didn't accomplish, there's a lot of things he wants to do in his life, but I look at players like that and all I see is how do we get them to where they really want to be?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's the thing. And so I've worked with more and more guys over the years. And I'm starting to hone it. It's really been honed into the space where it's like, it's about bridging a gap between the conscious and the unconscious. But you can see I have a hard time talking about it in a small, short way. Right?
Yeah.
So,
No, it makes sense. As we look at, someone like Shea, I'm sure we'll probably kind of keep going back to that episode for some context as we go throughout here. But, I know one thing he kept kind of mentioning and alluding to in the episode was he felt like he wasn't always able to bring his best self to the pitch, week in and week out. And some of that was he felt like kind of the way he interacted with his coaching staff or the way he interacted with his teammates. He didn't always feel the most confident and the most, I think timid was a word that he used from time to time throughout. So when you kind of describe what it is that you do, maybe using that as a little bit of context for what the audience is listening to, how do you then describe to, a professional player like Shea, or, if he refers you to another one of his teammates or something, how does it kind of change when you describe what it is that you do to somebody who may be looking for help and is a professional athlete?
Yeah, well, when you're actually working with someone, it's a little different because they heard about you from somebody else, and this could help me. And so players that come to me typically are looking for help, which is a tricky thing. Like if I end up, there's some conversations I'm having with a handful of different franchises about possibly going to work on their staff and going into a situation where it's like, we want you to make these guys capable of what we want them. We got these 8 homegrown players that aren't living up to their potential. Can you go fix that? That'll be a whole different level of study for me. Like, all right, how do I go into where they're not looking for help, but they need it? How do I do that? But with a lot of these guys, the first thing that happens is I just go, what can I help you with? And they'll start going, well, I had a player who's now currently on the national team. Like he said, I hate soccer. That was the first thing he said. I have a lot of anxiety and I hate soccer so much and I want to quit.
Oh,
that's what he said.
man.
Yeah.
And that just like break your heart to hear that? Like, how do you even?
Well, this is
I hear that and it hurts me inside.
Well, as someone who's, in my mind, I'm fascinated, to be honest with you. Like for me, I just go, that's amazing. Here's this guy who's, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, whoa, what an interesting problem to solve. For me, it's a Rubik's Cube. And so I'm just looking at going, oh, no, this is interesting. And you'd be shocked how many high level players have told me things similar to that. I hate soccer. I had a guy at the MLS Rookie Symposium in 2000, I think it was 17 or 18, says, can I talk to you? I'm like, yeah, we get private. And he goes, I hate soccer so much. Like I'm really, really good at it, but I hate it. He had like blood dripping from his teeth kind of thing, like I hate soccer. And it's like, wow, man, that's amazing. And I'd have guys line up after my talks to tell me essentially that. And so it's a really interesting thing to watch how that starts. I had a player last year I was working with, MLS guy. He was on their minor league team, but he's a classic example of a guy who's just like, I'm supposed to be everything, and they hung a lot of stuff, a lot of money and a lot of commitment and a lot of hype on him. And he's saying he's not living up to it. I asked him, well, what's the problem? What can I help you with? And he goes, I forget how to play soccer when I train with the first team. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, like, my body doesn't, it's like, I don't know how to play. I'm like, oh, you get the yips, we call that the yips, right? Your body dissociates. I'm sure. A lot of guys, I dealt with that when I was in college. I played college soccer and I was an anxiety ridden mess. And there's no reason. I was a freak of nature athletically. And I should have been, but the same problems, right? So his body, he's literally dissociating. I've had college players come to me that are, I had a coach call me one time. So I need you to work with this girl. And she's having a panic attack every time she comes to practice, it's things like that. And so what you do is you start there. And you start with them, it's not sports psychology. And that's one of the problems, right? Is people go, well, they're athletes, so we're going to do sports psychology now. Mm-hmm. Right? We're going to train an athlete. When the truth is, we have a traumatized human being who's been traumatized, and a lot of their trauma is in the context of their relationship with the thing they have to do now for a living. So it's like going, oh, let's go hang out with your abuser every day and ask you to do this thing really well, and actually, work into that without actually working into that psychology, we just try to teach them sports psychology for the most part is like, we're trying to teach them mental skills and these kinds of things to deal with it. But we're not actually working into the deep trauma and how they hold it in their bodies. I mean, if a guy's getting the yips, that means his body, he is literally leaving his body when he goes to training because it's so unsafe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So my job is to get them feeling that, you know, and it's basic principle. If you can feel it, you can heal it. So like the whole idea is like, well, what does that feel like? You know, I mean, I had a player, this is really interesting when I had this player, high school player, senior in high school, but he was committed to go to a Division II college, you know, kind of medium range Division II college. And I didn't expect him to come work with me. It's interesting. I just out of nowhere, he's, hey, can I do some work with you? I'm like, yeah, you know, but I'd always kind of seen him as a relatively healthy guy. I'd actually coached, I'd been an assistant coach on his team. And so we start working and I said, so what are we working on? You know, just like I do with everybody, like, well, what are we doing here? And he said, I feel intimidated when I play against players that I know are better than I am. I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, what's intimidated feel like? He says, well, it makes me not want to play. And I said, well, that's a nice thought. You know, that's a nice thought. I don't want to play. I don't want to play. I don't feel like playing, but it's not a feeling. What's it feel like? Right. And then eventually he says, well, it's frustrating. It's really frustrating. I'm like, oh, okay. That's deeper. That's nice.
Getting closer.
That's a deeper, yeah, it's an emotional experience, right? You're frustrated. I go, what's the frustration feel like? And then he finally got down to what I call the third level. Like he got down to that. And it took him a while because I'm going, in your body, like what's your body experiencing? And he's like, he pinpointed this pain in his chest. He goes, I get this pain in my chest, which is interesting because that's how Shay was too. Shay's like, it's in my chest. It's right there in my chest. And I said, yeah. So, you know, what is that? And he's like, I don't know, man. It's like a sharp kind of pain. And he goes, I think it's been there a while. I'm like, yeah. So you're aware of it at some level. Yeah. So we start dealing with, this is how we find out how the body is holding trauma. And the thing about it is a lot of these guys are actually, you know, I mean, the guy that's on the national team, he was like, I have really good parents. He was confused because he's like, I don't understand. Like my parents are really good people. I had a really easy, beautiful upbringing. You know, of course I talked to his dad at one point. His dad's like, you know, I was one of those dads, you know, and they don't understand just how fragile these kids are and then how we put them in organized soccer at such a young age. I mean, way too young. I mean, the research is clear. Like kids actually, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but the research says that kids shouldn't play organized sports till they're about 12. But
and we're throwing them in there at 6.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was just doing a session right before coming on here with you. I was doing a session with a guy. He's got a trial for the USL team and anxiety has crushed him his whole life. But he's like, this is my last shot. He started playing when he was 4 years old. It was his first organized soccer, you know, and developmentally kids at that point are literally in a womb space. You know, they are driven to discover the truth of one thing. I am loved unconditionally, no matter what. And we're like that till we're almost 10. I mean, that's literally, we are driven to that one question. And you put someone in an organized sports space and they're still asking that question. Am I loved? Am I not loved? Am I okay? Am I safe? Am I valuable? And now you have this performance-driven thing that's getting this constant feedback loop with mom and dad. And then so they develop a relationship with themselves through the interaction of their parents and this performance that they're doing. And so their relationship with soccer becomes very parental, you know? And so it becomes a matter of safety, not safety. I mean, the game of soccer, I mean, I'm assuming you've played it at some level.
Yep.
Right? Yeah. I mean, the game of soccer is actually relatively simple, like technically, tactically, and athletically. If you can execute these motions at this speed with this level of physicality, then you can be effective at it. It's not that complicated, to be honest with you. I mean, and we slap all kinds of cliches on it, but for a guy like this guy I was working with New England last year, like well, you're clearly more athletic than they are. You're just as technical, if not more technical than they are. What's stopping you? Well, that can be answered in one thing: the drive towards safety. Your drive is to be safe. You're trying to keep some young part of you safe and loved. And I'm sorry, man, it can't be done in an environment of professional soccer. It just can't be done.
Yeah. There's a word there that you kind of sprinkled in a couple times that is so important, and it's something that I think I didn't really truly understand what it meant or what it was until I started to work more on it recently, and that's the idea of trauma, right? Mm-hmm. I think, you know, I've spoken about this on the podcast before. Like, I was in a position where I signed a contract with a team, was playing overseas, and it was, you know, right in the middle of the pandemic, so I'm like isolated. I'm not really playing the best, and I had that same feeling at times where I was like, wow, this game sucks. Like,
Yeah,
this game
yeah,
is awful.
yeah,
And I remember coming home and like people would be like, "Oh yeah, it was like a traumatic experience." I was like, "What do you mean? I was playing soccer in a beautiful country like with all these amazing people. How is that like real trauma is, this or that. Real trauma is domestic abuse or, the list goes on and on of what you would consider what a real trauma is." And then the more and more I dove into it, I was like, "Huh, that was a traumatic experience." And now, as you're explaining as well, that all these athletes that come to you, they have whatever it is their trauma for them, and a lot of times, like you said, now they're going into it day in and day out and having to face their trauma head on.
yeah.
Is that what you feel is the biggest thing that you do when you work with these players? Is kind of figuring out where their trauma is, and then is it giving them the tools to face it head on, or how does that relationship with the trauma progress from there?
Yeah, well, this is where the work that I'm doing, honestly, like there's a research component to it. I'm not compiling, case studies and preparing to write some huge research paper on it, but I am, uh, I've been developing my own modality on how to deal with this for years. Because when I first started, of course, like anybody who's really doing any effective healing work, it kind of comes from initially dealing with your own trauma. Like, so
Yep.
for me, 12, 13 years ago, dealing with addiction and depression and anxiety and everything that had limited me, not just athletically, but in my life in general and everything, relationships and business and money and all those kind of things. I started doing my healing work. And what I found was I was doing a mixture of traditional counseling work, traditional psychological work, mixed in with some indigenous traditions, mixed in with some energetic traditions. Some of the stuff you're seeing in more metaphysical kind of territories now that you're seeing. Like I never did psychedelic work, but you hear it being talked about in the what the psychedelics and helping people heal. So I was mixing all this stuff in my own work. And at the same time, I went to grad school and did a master's degree, and I started kind of going, man, it seems to me that if we take all this stuff and there's all these traditions and there's ancient spiritual traditions, all this stuff, and if we kind of push this stuff in the same space, we can create something that's very, very fast, very efficient, very effective. And it's just a matter of, do we know how to talk about it right? You know what I mean? Because if I'm sitting down in a think tank in the NFL headquarters or something like that, and I start talking about, somebody with a shaman's rattle, over the top of me doing something, you know what I mean? They're going to start to go, what? But what I do with players is it's not just coming to an awareness of the unconscious. That's a big part of it. We want to develop a profound awareness of what we're actually bringing to this game, right? Yeah. I was just doing a session with a guy, and we were literally doing a visual meditation of driving to training. And he was discovering that in the back seat, there was all these young parts of him. Now, in some, I don't know if you've read any therapy, but like in psychodynamic type of therapeutic theory, the psyche is a fractured thing. And that's what trauma is. It's fractured. I actually believe that the soul is part of that it's an actual energetic body. And we know, quantum mechanics has shown us that consciousness exists. We have consciousness, and in ancient traditions, they would call that soul, but that PTSD or trauma is an actual fracture of the soul, that it's a fracture in our type of consciousness. The question that still modern psychology is really wrestling with is, can that be reassembled or reintegrated? So I was trained in psychodynamic theory, and psychodynamic theory says that we can come to an awareness of these different fractured young parts of our psyches, and we become aware of them, and we can gradually develop a loving relationship with them again. And that in that process, there's a type of redemption. I actually believe that we can actually reintegrate those pieces relatively efficiently on an energetic level. Okay? And so the modality I have is a little bit cutting edge, I would say, but I've been doing this with athletes, and it's creating radical shifts really quickly. So I'm seeing players go from, I could tell you stories all day long. I had a player last year, Toronto FC, outside back at Toronto FC, hasn't seen an ounce of playing time in 2 years. 5 sessions in, because I tend to do about 12 sessions to start with. And that's usually enough to get going. But 5 sessions in, he gets cut. By the end of the season, he wins the award for the best young player for the Houston Dynamo as a forward. It was that radical of a shift. And now he's just crushing it. And he gets a new contract, and guys' options are getting picked up when they were about to get cut. This kind of radical shifts. A guy's going from career is tanking to national team call-ups. And that kind of stuff is happening because it turns out we were always athletic enough, we were always strong enough, we were always technical enough, we were always tactical enough, we always had that ability. What was holding us back was an unconscious thing. And when you study pro sports as a landscape, we're not studying the difference between bad and good. Watch youth sports, we're going, well, that guy's just not a good player and that guy's a really good player.
Yeah.
At that level, we're studying the minute, tiny little minuscule differences between good and great. And that's actually mostly held in the unconscious. I mean, the difference between this guy and that guy, when I look at a guy and go, well, what's the difference between you and him? Like I'll put a guy, I mean, Chris Wondolowski is an interesting example, right? Is this player that seemingly had no business becoming this unbelievable superstar.
Yeah.
Because he's not that athletic. I mean, he's a good athlete, but he wasn't super athletic. He wasn't technically super amazing. He wasn't all this kind of stuff. So I'll look at a striker and I'll go, what's the difference between you and him? And they usually don't know. Or they'll come up with some crazy excuse. I had one guy go, well, he has better midfielders than me. I'm like, are you kidding me? On the San Jose Earthquakes, his midfielders are better than your midfielders. And that's why he's better than you are. Well, eventually, of course, they go, I don't know. Right. Okay. Because one, you probably haven't studied him. I go, but two, like this is an unconscious problem. We're dealing with the subconscious. Right. So it's for me, it's about integrating the unconscious and the conscious. So Carl Jung said about 70% of what we do every day comes from our unconscious, meaning we are unaware of why we do what we do. So if we can make ourselves aware of that and then actually do some of the energetic, we combine that with the energetic work. Eventually, the goal is that, this guy I was working with this morning is 23. Like the goal is that just the 23-year-old man can go to practice without all these little kids to take care of in his unconscious. And if he can, then he can focus on the craft of soccer, which can be perfected. That's just a matter of making your weaknesses into strengths and having the courage to fail well. If you have a loving relationship with failure, you can accomplish anything. But if you got a bunch of little kids that desperately need love, then that's not an option.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think you hit something interesting there. One of the most interesting things I kind of learned as I haven't played at any crazy high levels, but decent enough levels, is like the difference actually isn't that high. As you mentioned there, youth level, you can watch players. Okay, that's a good player. That's a not so good player. The higher and higher you go, everyone's a good player. And all of a sudden, it's just these little shifts in mentality, whether it's during the course of a game, during the course of training, whatever. It's whoever can be, I don't know if I want to use the word mentally strong. Maybe that's the right phrase just for our context right now, but it's whoever can mentally outwit kind of the opponent. And that's something that's been really fascinating to me because everybody thinks, obviously the amateur would go up and they would play against a top level professional and it wouldn't go very well for them. But really, once you start getting up into like higher level players, the difference physically, technically, tactically, it's not light years away. It's really more so just mentally. Obviously, there's a number of repetitions that have been gone into that higher level player that make them, a different caliber in certain regards, but mentally is just the biggest thing. Yeah. And I can hear it in the way that you describe what you do, that obviously there's been a passion for you in the game of soccer kind of specifically is where you've been able to kind of create your niche a little bit. Right. Where did that come from? Obviously, I know you mentioned you were a player, you do some coaching now as well, but where did also this combination of working on the psychological side and also this game in particular, where did those two things kind of meet for you?
Yeah. So I actually, I didn't play a ton of sports growing up. I was a good athlete, but my parents didn't have money and kind of didn't believe in it. We were very religious, and a lot of sports was kind of seen as a replacement for God or something like that. So it was kind of a frustrating kind of experience, but my parents were missionaries. And so we moved to Africa when I was pretty young.
Okay.
And so I just played on a sandlot in my neighborhood. I was the only white kid in the neighborhood. And I just tried to keep up with we literally had this garbage dump where everybody dumped their garbage in our neighborhood. And there was a sandlot on top of the garbage dump and we would just play up there. And that's where I started playing the game of soccer. And I got really, really good at it in that context because mom and dad weren't there watching. It was just a kid trying something, moving at a certain speed. And so I got technically very good very quickly. And I never trained. I didn't have private trainers. I didn't have anything. I just was, and nobody's like, hey, let's have the U11s over here. It was just everybody in the neighborhood came out and you got to try to keep up with the big kids. So you get better really quick, and I go home and my mom would be like, what were you doing? Playing soccer? Was it fun? Yeah. And that's it. That was the extent of it. So my identity was nice and safe at home. loved it. Well, dinner's in a few minutes. And I was going out there and developing this relationship with the game. And that's kind of where it came from. And I was always athletic enough and technically good enough. And I had a really good head for the game that I could be good enough, but I never had any ambition. I never had any drive. I never had anything like that. Nobody was pushing me. Never played club soccer. I walked on to a small NAIA college and earned a scholarship and played. Never became what I was capable of being, lost a lot, but then I started coaching because I was good. I understood the game and I was a good leader and I was articulate in that way. I actually coached for 20 years. I don't coach anymore. I ended up coaching that high school team with a buddy because I had a friend of mine call me out of nowhere and he's like, "Hey man, like I took this job. I don't understand rich white kids. So I need you to come help because it's in this really affluent area." He's like, "Can you help me out with that part?" So I literally just was there to advise him in a lot of ways. I remember at one point, it's funny. He goes, "Hey, come here," in the middle of a varsity game. He goes, "Why are they all looking at me all the time?" I said, "Because you're dad." And he's like, "I'm dad?" I'm like, "Yeah, you're dad." He's like, "Why am I dad?" I'm like, "I'll explain it on the way home." But that's kind of what it developed there. And then it just started. When I started doing my life coaching, I'd come to the point in my own healing work. Once I started to deal with the intensity of my own trauma. And my trauma was very similar to what you're describing. It wasn't acute trauma. My dad wasn't kicking the crap out of me at home or something like that, which I have run into with athletes. Okay. I've had players. I had a player who's now in MLS right now. He was like, "Yeah, I'd have a bad game and I get knocked out cold, And so that kind of stuff does happen. But I once I started dealing with my own trauma, I was coaching soccer at the same time and I was doing private training a lot, just to try to make some extra money. And then I started to notice, once I was doing my own work on myself, then I started to notice it in other people. And I was dealing with these kids and there's this interesting thing happening where I'm seeing them get triggered in certain situations, especially when they would fail. I give them a drill that's a little too tough and something emotional would happen. I started to understand it. And then one day I started to feel it. I started feeling like, what is that? Like I'd feel something and tweak in my chest when the kid would get triggered. And I go up and go, "What are you feeling right here in your chest?" And go, "It feels tight." And I'm like, "Oh, that's weird." So I start to kind of experience their energies. I had a player show up one time, first session with him. He's 14. He comes, I remember, and I was at this point, I'm just kind of studying it. I'm doing technical private training. I'm trying to help them get better, but I'm watching this kid and I put out a little box, about 12 yards out and I'm sitting in the goal. And I just like, "Hey, I'm just going to watch you shoot for a little bit. So I'm going to play a ball to you, just pop it out to your right and then hit a shot. And then I'm going to play another one, pop it out to your left, hit a shot. I'm just going to watch it, just watch your mechanics a little bit." And he's so nervous, he can't even function. I mean, we're literally the only ones on the field. I'm like, "Are you like really nervous?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "You never done private training before?" He goes, "No." I go, "Well, just, take a deep breath, relax and just shoot." Another minute or so, he just couldn't function. So I say, "Hey, come here." And he's just sitting there and he's kind of standing in front of me. He's kind of bouncing and moving, shaking around a lot. And I go, "What are you feeling right now?" And this is before I did this for a living. I was a private trainer. Right? "What are you feeling right now?" He says, "I don't know, in your body." He goes, "I don't know, I feel kind of jittery." I go, "Like a nervous tension in your body, kind of like restless?" And he goes, "Yeah." I go, "Is that why you're moving so much?" And he goes, "Yeah, I think so." I go, "Well, stop moving." He's like, "What?" I go, "Stop moving, go completely still." And he did. And then tears started coming out of his eyes, just literally immediately. And he just goes, "Oh my God." And he's like, "That was weird." Yeah. And I'm like, whoa. And I'm just noticing repressed emotional energy just stuck in the body. And so over the years I was just collecting experiences. I mean, sorry, I hit the mic there. I was doing private training for 14 years. I mean, I'm almost 46, so I've been doing this a while, and I just been gathering information, studying. And then when I started doing life coaching, because I got to the point in my healing, I'm like, I think I can help some people. So I started doing it. And some athletes started trickling in because I kind of come from that world.
Yeah.
People had known me. It's like, "Yeah, I'd like to do this work with you." And then they started, you hit people who are talkers and they start telling this guy or that guy. And then, I got invited to do some speaking and, like the rookie symposiums and that kind of stuff. And it just grew from there. And now I've got baseball players. I got Major League Baseball players. I'm kind of this year, I'm starting to head into the NFL space. And it's interesting when you only do referrals. Like I don't market myself. Like it spreads kind of like a virus, it's like
Yeah.
and so you just end up in certain spaces at some point, everybody's like, well, you should try golf. I'm like, yeah, if I ever meet a
If somebody
golfer,
knows somebody.
yeah, maybe that'll happen, but it's very organic. It's very organic in that space, how I do the work. And I only take 20 clients. That is my max at any given point. But I'm having conversations. Like I'm on a meeting tomorrow with a psychologist from an NFL team, to talk about working with their rookies. And, I'm having a conversation with an MLS team about coming on staff. There's it's starting to spread because it's working. Right. And that's the thing, really, I'm very passionate about this. Like we can solve this issue, I mean, I was speaking to a president of an NFL team last year, and they had a quarterback who was doing one dumb thing after another that ended up in the news. And they'd spent $70 million on this guy, high draft pick. And I said, man, you should have him come work with me. He's like, yeah, that'd be a good idea. I'm like, yeah. And a week later they cut him. And I was like, could have saved you a lot of money, man. But it's just because, people have these cliches. I remember doing this talk with an academy staff, an MLS academy staff. And I was talking about Freddie Adu. Like, yeah, like why didn't Freddie, what happened? Oh, he just wasn't good enough, or he wasn't this. I mean, one guy was like, I don't think it was a trauma issue. I think he was just not mature enough. Yeah, but why? Why wasn't he mature enough? What caused the blockage in that growth, in that maturity? In the end, human beings are traumatized. That's what the human experience is. When we talk about the human condition, it's trauma. We all have it. We all carry it at some level. And it's because when we come into this world, we come in entitled to unconditional love. We're just here like, love me, I'm ready. And then really quickly, no matter how good our parents are, really quickly, we discover that there are conditions to this, be it certain behaviors, certain performances, certain things we have to do. And that's when we start to take on that, we start to fracture. We start to take on that trauma of like, I guess it's not just going to come to me like I need it, and then the goal is that eventually we can repair that. But my passion is for understanding how that affects high level sports, because there are a few jobs. As someone, you've ever been on trial. I mean, if you understand there are a few jobs like that in the world. It is a very intense experience in these short bursts every day. And somehow you're supposed to bring everything you got, because there's 3 more guys trying to take my job and take my livelihood and take away the thing that I've been training since I was 6 years old to do. It's just not normal. The only jobs that we can equate it to are maybe police work or being a soldier. There's just very few jobs like it. And I want to help in that area, because I actually think that type of intensity can if we work it and we switch it to a new paradigm instead of survival, I think it actually is a path to enlightenment. I actually think it's something that can lead to profound healing and profound levels of accomplishment.
Is, as you just mentioned there, the trial process there at the end is something that is so completely unique to sports. I guess the only comparison really is the job interview, but I don't know. I just don't feel like it's comparable to going into a trial where you're brand new and you're already thrown in, essentially asked to do the job, whereas the interview is sort of the precursor to, hey, are you capable of doing this job? The trial is, we've kind of deemed that you are capable. Now it's like, can you do it, and can you do it better than what we already have, or at the level that we already have? Do you
for less money?
What are your experiences with players? Because I'm sure this is something that a lot of players could gain some insight for. What are your experiences with players? What are the things that they describe as the emotions when they feel they're going into a trial? Or how can basically my question is, how can a player best attack a trial?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've worked with that a lot, because I've had a lot of players go into trial, and I actually teach, and I work energetically and in the body and dealing with the ego. The goal is non-attachment. Okay. And the goal is very Buddhist, like non-attachment. Like the idea is we all, you hear it in sports psychology all the time, control the controllables, right? Like we're going to control what we can control. We're going to let go of what we can't control. Well, that's easier said than done. Right. But the idea is to go in, and I actually use more traditional term, non-attachment. Right. And if we can go in completely surrendered and completely releasing the control over the things that we have no say in, and we can focus all our energies on what we can control, what is right here in front of us, which is the craft of soccer itself. If we can do that, then we go into a trial, then we're giving ourselves the best chance possible. But there's I actually teach a surrender to, I call it spirit. People use different terms, God, consciousness, the universe, like whatever term, like, you know, I actually say that I believe that there is something in this universe and that actually has the power to kind of organize our lives and help us accomplish dreams and manifest those things. And so I teach players about that. Like, we're going to surrender and we're going to accept that whatever comes is the thing we need. So if we need to not make it, if we need to get cut, like I had a player recently, just a couple of weeks ago, was on trial with an MLS team, and he's a college player that wants to go play pro. And he went, and they, after 2 weeks, played okay, had a little bit of a tough time, did some really good work because it was hard and he got triggered a lot. So he was struggling. There was young parts of him showing up, you know? So he did some really good work, and they told him, hey, we got our eye on you, but you're not quite there yet. But because he was in a state of surrender, he was able to go, okay. So I said, did you get some feedback? He goes, yeah, I got some really good feedback. I'm like, perfect. So we took the gift that was given to us. Now we're going to go, and you have a laboratory called college soccer to go back and do your work yourself, work the internal body and work the external game and perfect this craft, so that they, at some point, they're going to look and go, we can't ignore him any longer. We have to bring him in. Right? And that's the idea, is that we want to earn everything. We don't want to be given a chance because it's some sort of charity thing. We want to earn it because they can't ignore us, because we're just lighting up in that way. So that non-attachment, it takes a little bit of faith, right? And we have to learn. Surrender is a skill, you know, learning how to surrender and just go, I'm going to let go and just let whatever comes be the thing that comes. I mean, I had this player that's really interesting. He's in MLS currently. Okay. And he's been in the league for 10 years. But he's had a rough go of it over the last 3 or 4 years. Just one team, this team, that team. And then he gets this thing, and he gets this thing, and then the contract, and all these kind of situations. And he texted me just a few months ago. He's a free agent. He's not getting any offers. And he said, you're telling me that everything that comes is for my highest good. I'm like, yep, everything. He goes, okay, well, here's my situation. And he has a situation. I'm not going to describe the whole thing, but for any situation, you look at it and he's like, it's bullshit. He's like, this is bullshit, man. And I'm like, I was okay. And it's a podcast.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
He goes, it's bullshit. I go, yeah. I go, that's one way to put it. I go, or this is high level training from the universe that's giving you something to continue to break your ego and put it in its place, to continue to expand your wisdom and the depth of your own healing, to prepare you for the rest of your life when your career is over. That's, you know, or you can, it's bullshit. I go, and you're right. Both are true. You know, but which one's going to benefit you more? Which story is going to benefit you more? And he's like, well, clearly so let's go with that one. That's a better one. He's like, okay. So he was offered a contract that was about a third of what he'd made the year before. And that was his only offer. And I said, let's just say yes. He goes, okay, I'm going to say yes. And he went into that situation, and he's like having all these revelations because his ego is just chirping at him going, man, we deserve more. And he's starting to realize that I don't think I actually have to adopt that perspective anymore. I think I can be at peace no matter what, and continue to dedicate myself to the craft. And that's what he's doing. And he's finding peace and joy and happiness. And he's a new dad, and he's realizing this is going to affect me as a father. I'm like, yeah. Hey, this is going to affect me as a husband. Yeah. This is going to affect me when it comes to love and life and business. Yeah. Yeah. All of it. You're learning how, you know, I actually love how Dax McCarty has been in the league for 17 years. And I know Dax a little bit. And at one point I'd asked him, you know, what's it take to have a great career? You know, I just wanted to hear his perspective. And he said, you got to be able to eat shit for 3 years. That's what he said. But I've realized that the ability to eat shit and be at peace is a really valuable skill.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it, you know, that's the thing. So if somebody's going on trial, there's something shitty about it, because your ego is going to be chirping at you the whole time, just going off about what could happen, what couldn't happen, what, you know, it's trying to resolve the anxieties of the future, and it's trying to deal with the pain of the past. And it's trying to do all of that, when what you're actually just trying to do is go in and show it. Here's a skill set. Here's a craft. Here's my ability to apply it. The goal is to be able to release all that future and past and be here now. And I know that's a very Buddhist thing to say, and I'm not a Buddhist, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's completely true. You know, that ability to manifest who we are and everything we've learned and everything we trained ourselves to do right here in this moment, regardless of the outcome. That's the key, you know. But you have to be able to trust that. So a lot of soccer players, because they've been doing it for so long, and because their world is like, here's where you'll make your money, here's where you'll be okay, here's where you're going to get love. And when it's over, there's nothing on the other side of it. Because that's so many people's paradigm. They don't realize, like, well, what if we just switch it? What if soccer is training for the rest of your life? You know, what if by the time you exit this game at, I mean, Clint Dempsey retired a couple of years ago at 34, and everybody's like, he's an old guy. I'm like, no, he's not. He's incredibly young. He's
Yeah.
an incredibly young man. And by the time you're mid 30s, hopefully you realize how young you are. What if soccer was just training? It was a very intensive training for the rest of your life, so that your levels of creativity and joy and happiness can just skyrocket. I mean,
Yeah. Sports is one of the things for me that I think it's completely, for lack of a better word, just fucked up my view of age, honestly.
yeah, yeah,
Because, you have 17, 18-year olds that burst onto the scene and are playing professionally. And it's like, if you haven't made it, you haven't established yourself by, what, 22, 23, people are like, oh, well, missed your window. And then,
right.
as you said, you have guys who, it's like the minute you turn 30, all of a sudden they're like ready to give you a walker and nail you out to pasture. It's like,
Right.
I'm really happy to see that there's so many athletes now that are like, in all sports, are breaking that mold, and that's no longer the case, right? Tom Brady, perfect example, still playing well into his 40s, and now also you see it in soccer as well. Zlatan's still playing at a high level, and the list goes on and on. But yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because I feel as though a lot of, even other players that I talk to, there's like 21-year-olds that I'm talking to that they feel like they have to grow up and they have to mature so much, because they're expected to already have made it. They're expected to be in the first team and performing well, and if you haven't by then, okay, well, you missed your window. And the beautiful thing about the game, but also kind of the curse of the game, is if you miss that window up until a certain point, you can't really get it back, because obviously we all know our body won't allow us to do this forever. It's not like something that we can use our mental faculties to be able to still continue to do this for years and years to come.
Right.
Yeah, I'm happy that you mentioned that, because it's
Yeah.
something that always just throws me off.
Yeah. Well, and I've watched the players that I'm working with as they've adopted this paradigm. Oh, soccer. I mean, I know it sounds a little woo-woo maybe, but like soccer's a path to enlightenment. I'm always going, yeah, what if we adopt that? Because how many jobs are going to trigger you this bad? How many jobs are going to constantly push you? How many jobs are going to create this catalyst for growth, because every day you're on the edge? Not many jobs are like that. There's some people that live on that edge a little bit here and there. But like, most jobs don't push you on the edge every single day and expect your highest performance every single day. Most people can kind of go and they can coast a bit, and then every once in a while they bring it.
Yeah.
But soccer is one of those ones where, and if you embrace it and you go, okay, so this is about recovering every part of me that I lost in my childhood. This is about reorganizing my entire paradigm for how the world works. And this space I'm in, however long I'm given this space, for Shea it was just a few years, but you heard his story, right? Just this intense movement and so many lessons learned. Now he gets to take all that stuff, because he had a good paradigm for it.
Yeah.
He gets to take all that stuff and he's going to head into business or medicine, whatever, and there's going to be all this wisdom fueling his still very young self. You know what I mean? Very young self. And that's the thing. That's why, like, if you adopt it that way, then the 30s can become something more than, my generation. The 30s is about midlife crisis and serious depression and struggle, right? Well, I think a lot of these guys like that I'm seeing, I mean, I got this guy, he's 22. This one guy, man, he's unbelievable. He's 22 years old, and he's more mature at 22 than I was at 40. And it's because he's just going, okay, I'm going to let this really intense context just teach me and grow me and teach me and grow me. And every time he goes in, he's observing the narrative. Like his team brought in this foreign player in his position recently, and it's a big news. We got this super duper guy, and he's come here for one reason, to take his job. And the guy's making 3 times as much as he is, and he's just like, this is triggering me. I'm like, yeah, let's use it. And
Yeah.
what an awesome challenge, man. How cool would those be if we can, so now, of course, he had these young parts of him showing up, and his ego starts going, no, you're not going to make it, man. They're never going to give you a chance. They're never going to do this. And he's just, instead of becoming that anxiety, he's observing that narrative. He's feeling the presence of these younger parts of him that are scared that they're going to lose love, that they're going to lose what they need. He's doing the work of integrating them. And he's still looking at his ego going, yeah, I don't think we're going to go with that story. I think we're going to go with the story of like, hey, what if we could show them just how good we are? I mean, what a great chance to do that. And he's just working. And it's beautiful because he's to be honest, he's kicking ass. Like, you know, and he's going to have this really, really cool story because of it. And of course, and I told him, I said, yeah, you know, when you take that position, everybody's going to make up their bullshit stories about how he just came out of nowhere. I mean, listened to TV commentators try to explain the rise of this player or that player after they made some radical shift in their unconscious, you know, and it's all some bullshit, you know. Well, he just, you know, he went and got himself a left foot, you know, and that's really transformed his, you know, that's really transformed his game, you know, when he just went and got himself a left foot.
He picked it up in the last few months.
Yeah, I just grabbed it at the store. He's like, I should have bought this a long time ago, you know.
Yeah.
When the truth is, he lost fear. He lost his fear of his weaknesses, and he applied himself consciously every single day to his training, and he improved his craft, you know. And in the end, if you give you give your coach a better chance at winning and keeping his job, he'll play you. So let's do that, you know. And I just love it, man. I just think it's you know, everyone needs a catalyst for growth in their life. The people that are struggling the most are the ones that have no catalyst because they don't know how to dream. They don't know how to go for something big, or they don't have the courage to step out, and they don't have something pushing them like that, and they're not growing. So they're just sitting there kind of suffering silently, you know?
Yeah.
What is it? I'm trying to remember that quote. It's slipping my mind right now, but like that idea of quiet desperation, you know, that most men live in quiet desperation. Oh yeah. Most men live in quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them, you know? Well, I just think pro sports is an amazing context for bringing that song out of people.
Yeah.
And it's my passion to help that happen. And can it solve some very expensive problems? Yeah. Yeah. You know, I mean, millions and millions and millions of dollars going down the drain because we don't know how to deal with the unconscious. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say and maybe you just kind of described who that person is there at the end, is maybe that person that has that quiet desperation, that maybe there's a bit of jealousy that seeps in when, you know, you often hear the narrative that many fans have of the game, or, you know, any professional athletics. Well, how can they struggle, or how can they go through anything because they get to go kick a ball for a living and they get to make millions of dollars. And obviously you and I can understand how just how that does not make any sense, especially because we experience it on a day-to-day basis. But, you know, what do you say to someone like that who clearly doesn't understand what it truly is like to be a professional athlete, professional soccer player?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. All the morons on Twitter and stuff like that, you know, they're doing their thing. Well, it's kind of funny because if I was in a conversation with somebody like that, and I get in it once in a while, you're hanging out with a bunch of people and then somebody starts talking crap about, you know, so-and-so's GM, and they start talking about players as if they're just trash you can throw away. You know, when I see human beings struggling with real things and there's this insight, I understand it because they are protected by this the fans live in an illusion. Okay. That this game is meaningful because it's actually not. Okay. It's just a game. And guess what? We're going to play another one. And guess what? If they lose, they're going to play next year. And guess what? It's just going to keep going forever. Right. It's meaningful in that you have human beings engaging this really intense, hard, deep thing. And it's a big deal. When I watch soccer, I can't get lost in the illusion of winning and losing anymore, but I do invest emotionally in what these men are going through and what they're trying to accomplish. Well, the fans, it's their job to live in that illusion because that's where the money comes from. Yeah. Right. This guy's buying the jersey and wearing the scarf and pissed off on Twitter and calling into sports radio, whatever. That's their job. So I don't try to shatter that illusion in people ever. When I'm in a conversation, I'll jump into that illusion with them. And they start going, oh, you know, they just need to get rid of so-and-so. I go, well, or so-and-so needs to, you know, perform better, you know? Yeah. And we'll start talking about that. And I get it on that level. There's a level for sports with that, you know. If I see an opening in someone where there's a curiosity as to why some player is struggling, then I'll start to offer some insight at times. Go, you know, truth is he's probably going through something really deep and he's probably struggling. Like I actually worked with a major league player last year, a pitcher, who called me and he said, I've had 8 seasons, 8 injuries. I've never finished a season healthy. Every time I start to get successful, I get hurt. And it's got to be something deeper than just I'm injury prone. Well, I'll turn on sports radio and listen to people calling in like, well, did you get rid of him? He's just an injury prone guy. Like you clearly shown that you can't stay healthy. And I'm going, oh, actually, no, we dove into some really deep, severe trauma, which is causing that, you know, but I get why they think that way. And that's okay. That is okay. We can just let them have
Yeah.
all their narratives and all their stuff and not understand what's really going on, because that's what actually fuels the entire world of sports.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I realize for me, I've personally, I feel like gone so much in the other direction that I always just anytime, a player is, as you said, on those TV shows being said they're not performing well or they're injury prone, I just go so far towards the empathy side. I'm like, that is a
Hmm.
person on the other, and I can't
Right.
even like put myself back in the mind frame of probably when I was younger as a fan,
Yeah.
where if someone's not playing well, I just be like, oh, he sucks, get rid of him. Like
Yeah.
I can't even get to that place anymore.
Yeah.
But you mentioned another thing. This could be a thing that I think could help a lot of players is maybe how does a player deal with an injury or consistent injuries? I think injuries are one of the most difficult things for athletes to deal with,
Hmm.
for athletes to come back from. What are some of the things that you notice that athletes struggle with without the course of an injury and their recovery process? And what are some of the things that you try and help them with along that journey?
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of players in injury rehab because severe injuries are such an intense trigger that they bring up so much anxiety that a lot of players come to me. I mean, the guy that's on the national team now that I mentioned, torn two ACLs. Like when I first worked with him, was on his first ACL tear. And this baseball player, Tommy John surgery. I had another guy I worked with last year as an MLS. Was out the entire season with an injury, and he's starting this season injured. And so a lot of that stuff comes up. The thing is, if I when I'm working with somebody that, like, we switch the paradigm, okay, to how this thing is cursing us to how this thing is blessing us, right? And so the difference between the narrative and the brain, are we going to be able to make a comeback? Will we ever make a comeback? Can we be as good? If we look at that and just start to observe that myth, then the myth that the ego is telling us, because it's so worried, like, how are we going to get love for all these young parts of us, if
Mm-hmm.
we don't have this thing. We switch it and we start going, how is this thing going to show us how to heal? Right. And that's a big part of it, going that all those parts of us that are freaking out because, well, what are we going to do if we don't have that? If we don't have that, right, we're going to start to heal those parts of us, because that drives a lot of the trauma is really interesting because it creates what I call a dialectic tension. Okay. Between the parts of it, there's these parts of us that need to be safe. They don't feel safe playing at a high level. Right.
Yeah.
So like this baseball player, every time I get successful, I get hurt, because there's a danger in success, just like there's a danger in failure. If I'm hurt, well, how are we going to get to love? But also, we're nice and safe, because injury is a safety narrative, right? We're not failing. We just got
Yeah.
hurt, right? And so it's this weird tension where he doesn't, like, the narrative deep down inside, because he's a traumatized human being, is, I don't deserve love and I don't deserve success. And at the same time, that's how I get my love, is through success. So it creates this really intense tension inside somebody. So they tend to just up and down, up and down, up and down. Yeah, there's a lot of players. If you really stood back and you studied it, how many players, as they start to approach success, get injured? It's pretty fascinating. And I actually said this, I ended up at this dinner party, long story, but I ended up at this dinner party like about a year and a half ago with a bunch of people in the kind of MLS world. And one of the ladies there had just gotten hired as the performance director for Minnesota United. And I said, can I ask you a question? I go, do you see any evidence for psychosomatic injuries being kind of a dominant thing, like injuries based on a kind of unconscious psychology? She's like, yes, I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure that's a big thing. I'm like, right. That's a common thing, because it's safe to get hurt. Right. It's safe. I mean, I had a player last year I was working with in MLS, and he said he's like, for him, he's trying to get into that starting lineup. And he goes, I'm starting to realize that everybody on the bench says they want to play, but I don't think they do. Like, right, because it's safe on the bench. He goes, yeah, it's like this unconscious thing. And he was talking about a couple specific players that are really good players that keep getting hurt over and over and over again. He goes, and I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. It's like a psychosomatic thing. It's not safe here. And so the ego is just pushing them, trying to get them out of the game. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, and I see it all the time. So when it comes to injury recovery, it's about switching that paradigm, going, this is here to teach us just like everything else. What's it teaching us? Well, if it's triggering a bunch of young parts of us, then let's heal them. If it's teaching us about, injury recovery is a normal part of being a professional athlete.
Yeah.
It is a skill to be mastered. Right. So let's take the wisdom it wants to offer us. Let's take the skill it wants to offer us so that we can heal and recover more efficiently. There's not a professional athlete that's ever existed that hasn't dealt with it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get really good at it, and there's all kinds of things that we can adopt where this just becomes part of assembling that thing we need to accomplish the dream we want to accomplish, of playing at a certain level, whatever. What we don't want is some mountaintop experience where, okay, so you win the, MLS Cup or whatever, or you get to Europe and you spend a couple of years in Europe. What we don't want is to plant a flag there and say, we did it. What we want is to just, every dream fuels the next one. Right. Okay. So now if we can accomplish this, what else can we accomplish? And keep pushing our boundaries. And that way we can live a high performance life that's actually really full of joy and happiness and creativity and wisdom and those kind of things. That's what, that's kind of what makes life worth living,
Yeah, absolutely. How do you teach, or how do you work with athletes on identity? And what I mean by that is, as you mentioned there's obviously there creates this feedback loop when you're a professional soccer player where, you're in the team, you're scoring goals, and the fans are cheering your name, and the coach is happy with you, your teammates are happy with you, and as you mentioned, really at the core, what are we looking for as humans? We're looking for love, we're looking for safety, right? Mm-hmm. And when you keep having that feedback loop of, oh, well, when I'm doing well in the field, that's where I'm getting that sort of creates this weird, it's something that I dealt with and I've spoken about in the past. Like, I wasn't able to separate the idea of me as me and me as the soccer player, right? They were one and the same. So it was like, I chose to try and become a professional at this. If I'm not playing well, then that's what it is. Doesn't matter. There is no separation between me as I'm still a good person. It's just, well, I'm not playing well.
Yeah.
How do you teach, or as I mentioned, or how do you kind of work on athletes creating a more healthy relationship with their identity as you are a person that plays football, but maybe necessarily you're not a footballer?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's, and we kind of been in this conversation kind of, dancing around that the entire time, right? Because the idea is, take any occupation. If what you do is who you are, it's because what you do is what got you the love you needed when you were young. Okay. We form our identity, believe it or not. We form the majority of our identity in the first 10 years of our life. Okay. Those are what we call the developmental years, right? So you come out of the womb. I mean, there's research that says that the thoughts of a mother towards her unborn child are already starting to form the child's identity. And identity, of course, is sense of self. The question, who am I? There's a big difference between what I do and who I am. But of course, in our culture, it's pretty normal to equate the two together. What do you do? When we go to a party, what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah.
Right. And most people can't wait to talk about what they do. And they've dressed it up in some sort of fancy language so that they can be good, be okay, be loved, be accepted, be okay. Right. Well, that's because trauma ultimately is the kind of triangular relationship between the love that I need, which is mom and dad, right, and the thing that I do to get that love. So it's a triangulated relationship, when what it should have been is, here I am, and I am loved no matter what. I am my mother's son. I am my father's son. I am loved no matter what. I am loved no matter what. And if that's done well in those first 10 years, and you come out of there going, I'm loved no matter what. So let's try some shit. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to go and give me something hard. Give me a challenge. So adolescence, in around 12 or so, is where we emerge into that space where it's like, we can just try something and I can fail really well, which means I can learn really fast. Right? Because of course, failure is the best teacher. So that's the idea of a solid identity. And we call that secure attachment, right? So in this, to use psychology terms, right? A secure attachment is someone who's not shakeable because their identity is solid. Well, most of us, that just wasn't the case. And our identity became a triangulated thing. Like, when I do this, I get the love I need. When I don't do this, I don't get the love I need. And it's as simple as a 4-year-old looking over at the sideline and dad's face just changed. Where dad's face was just this psychotic thing. I remember this was a few years ago. My son was, he was probably, I think he was 6 at the time, and he's 8 now. This was a couple of years ago. We're at the YMCA pool. Okay. Just swimming. My kids love to swim. I got 2 young kids and they love to swim. And my son goes down the water slide, and he was just learning how to swim. And this was a big adventure for him. So he goes down this kind of water slide, and he splashes in the water. And my wife just goes, yeah, she just freaks out. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, what are you doing? She goes, what? I go, why are you reacting like that? And she goes, well, I just want him to know we're proud of him. I'm like, does he get that reaction anywhere else? She's like, what? I guess not. I go, yeah. Do you know what that feels like to a 6-year-old who's in love with his mother? Like, that feels like it's rocket fueled.
Yeah.
And a child unconsciously goes, whoa. whatever that
I
is.
just did something right there.
I got to get more of that. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm going to become the best water slider ever because it gets me that. And so that's why, of course, like when you're working with parents, like the goal is to stay neutral. Actually, it's not to go up, it's not to go down, it's just to stay neutral. You know, a good play therapist is going to constantly go, you did that, how do you feel? Right. I've
Mm.
given talk to parents before. I gave a talk to the parents of this club on the East Coast at one point, and I remember this dad going, but I want my kid to know I'm proud of him. I go, well, trust me, he knows. If you're there, he knows. I go, but we're going to relay it in a different way. He goes, well, what do I say to him then? When he gets in the car, what should I say? You know, how are you feeling? That's it. He's like, that's it? Go, yeah, that's it. Instead of how was soccer, where he has to give you the report now how it went well, because that's what gets me the love. But deep down inside, he's growing a resentment towards it. Go, what we're going to do is say, how you feeling? And anything is acceptable. You know, if he says, I feel like shit, you can go, oh, okay, you want to talk about that? And if he says no, you go, okay, what do you want for dinner? And that's it, man. Just leave it, because all of a sudden the soccer car, the car ride home becomes a sanctuary of safety and emotional safety. And their relationship with you is safe and it's separate. And that's what matters, because their love will be not tied to the thing.
Yeah, and I think there's millions of athletes out there that can just resonate. Almost you almost created its own word for it, right? That soccer ride home, or that soccer car ride home.
Yeah.
So many athletes talk about that. Oh, as soon as I get in the car, and that's when shit's gonna hit the fan. And
Right.
why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Or I even had a story come to mind when you were just bringing that up about I work with. So I do private training as well right now, and I also will go in and we'll do some team stuff, and a lot of it is like with local kind of rec programs or local town clubs to kind of help the parent coaches get a little bit better idea of what they should be doing in their coaching.
Yeah.
And there's this one dad, and man, he's just so hard on his kid, and it's like it's almost always specifically on his own kid,
Right.
and I'm just like, I can see it happening. I'm like, oh man, this kid's gonna hate playing in a couple years.
Yeah.
And it's difficult from someone like me. I don't have kids, so I don't want to overstep and say, "Hey, man, I just
Right.
take it back just a step," because
Yeah.
it's not helping him in the way
Yeah.
that you think it is. I know you want him so badly to have success in the sport, and this is the way that you think it's going to get there, but it's just not. And I think that's a really hard thing for parents to understand, because they want to be so involved in their kids' sporting events, whether it be on the positive side or on the negative side.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I actually created, so I trying to solve that problem. I wrote a guidebook. So it's like a therapeutic guidebook. It's called On Frame, Exploring the Depths of Parenting in the World of Youth Soccer. And it's actually a therapeutic process for parents to go through to create that awareness. I mean, you can get it if anybody's listening and they're like, oh, I need to get that for the dads on my, the parents on my soccer team. It's on Amazon, On Frame, Exploring the Depths of Parenting in the World of Youth Soccer. You can just type my name in there and you'll find it. But the idea is to create for parents an awareness of what's happening unconsciously, not only within themselves, but within their kid as that's forming.
Yeah.
We have to make them aware. We need them to become aware, because that's, in the end, that's where it's all starting. Parent culture and youth sports is where all of this gets created. So when that draft pick, that got picked top 10 in the draft in the NFL fails and everybody goes, he's a draft flop. That's where it started. That is where it started. We had maturity issues, or we didn't really want it, and we slapped some bullshit cliche over it because we need to move on because the news cycle keeps going, and there's more money and there's more money and there's more money. And money's growing in MLS. Someday we'll be talking about it in the same terms we talk about in baseball and in the NFL and that kind of thing. Where some guy just signed, he's a number one pick, and he signed 2010, Danny Mwanga, number one pick in the MLS draft. Everybody's like, his upside is incalculable. This guy's going to be in Europe in a couple of years. I mean, he was out of soccer completely within about 6 years. And he had maybe a flash for about a month his rookie year. Why? And how much money got wasted? Well, on MLS level, there was probably wasted $1 million, right? But, the team lost that, and I want to save the team that money. But how much money did Danny miss?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great to how many millions of dollars could Danny have made so that when he exits his career, he can take a year off and really do some work and go on pilgrimage somewhere or something, you know what I mean? And really do his work, right? I mean, how much how much are these guys missing in that way, and how did it prepare him, and how's he going to wear that label the rest of his life now? It was a guy like Ryan Leaf, I mean, remember Ryan Leaf,
Yeah.
He's the ultimate example, right? Well, it's clear the guy was struggling with all kinds of trauma. There's all kinds of stuff going on. It was obvious, but we just tuck him away, call him a flop, and it's resigned to the trash bin of history. And I really want to change that,
Yeah.
and partly too, so that guys can discover joy, So one of my greatest pleasures is, like, I remember the guy I was talking about on the national team. I don't use a lot of names sometimes, just gotta, I want to respect people's privacy, but in the guy I was working with, he the last time I hung out with him, it's been a while, but the last time I hung out with him, I said, "Hey, well, how'd the joy levels?" So I asked him, how are your joy levels? He said, "I've never had so much fun playing soccer in my entire life." I'm like, it's awesome, man. So not only making some serious cash now, and he's having fun, and he's growing in his life, and he's enjoying the process, but he's having fun playing something that is objectively fun. Soccer is a fun game. And it's mind blowing that so many guys are playing it and aren't having any fun at all.
Yeah. So many.
Because it is. Because they're right. When they say you get to kick a ball for a living, that's actually true.
Yeah.
That is a pretty cool way to make a living. But of course, they don't understand that that's not the reality for most athletes, But it is. It is. And it'd be great if we could come to that point where we realize just how fun this is,
Yeah. Yeah. For everyone that's involved. How many, obviously, you've mentioned that you work with clients based on referrals, so you kind of have your network, but I'm sure that you have a broader scope, better equipped to answer this question than many others. How many players are really dealing with something that they could use someone like yourself that would benefit them? Meaning, how many players are struggling with their mental health or with their confidence in playing, or, kind of put it into perspective for us to help us understand the scope of this. How many players deal with something of this nature?
Yeah. Well, to preface my answer, so Carl Jung said, no one comes to consciousness without suffering. So the question is, there's enough guys out there that are suffering enough that they realize they need help. And then there's this huge swath of people that need help that they're just okay enough to not realize it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we talk about there's that bottom 20% that are really suffering. And I would say, and I'm not exaggerating here, I'd say 90 to 95% of the guys out there need help, and women need help, right? And they could desperately use it. About 20% of them, it's a matter of functionality. Like, if I don't get this help, I'm not going to be able to do this. And then there's that big chunk in the middle that really, really need help, that could benefit from it. And honestly, man, I gotta be honest, there's not that many people doing this. There's a lot of sports psychology is a growing industry. Sports psychology is woefully, and again, I'm going to be bold here with my opinion. It's just my opinion, but it's woefully inadequate in dealing with the actual problem. The problem is profound levels of deep trauma, and it's not being addressed. We're just hitting them with all this. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many GMs and coaches I talk to that are just like, yeah, the guys don't really dig the psychology stuff. Well, it's because they're giving stuff that is not helpful. I was at a rookie symposium for Major League Soccer. Okay. And a sports psychologist, after I gave my talk about identity formation, a sports psychologist from a certain MLS team came up after me and gave a talk. It was like 12 steps to an awesome career or something like that. And he said, and this is a guy with a PhD, and I quote, he says, guys, if you have 70 negative thoughts a day, we're going to change that to 70 positive thoughts a day. And that's going to change your life. That's word for word. He's speaking to 75 MLS rookies. And I leaned over to my friend who'd been in the league for 10 years and struggled. And I just went, man, have you just done that? And he goes,
you solved it.
It's like, what the hell was that? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I've heard PhD after PhD after PhD say stuff like that. I heard a guy one time in a think tank, MLS think tank, with a PhD, sports psychologist. He said, we were talking about getting these guys healthy, and they were just, and some people started bringing up a worry that if they get healthy, won't they lose their edge? And one guy, and this guy with a PhD, sports psychologist, said, we have to keep them zombies at some level.
Oh my God.
He said that. Oh, and my buddy almost turned the table over. He was like, if we're doing damage to one person, we've got to change this.
But I feel like that plays a little bit into, we touched upon this before, and maybe the fan perspective is, oh, they're just athletes that they go and play, and, they should enjoy it. But the other side of it that maybe even is a little bit more messed up is the owners of the club and GMs of, and this is in all sport where it's like, you've mentioned it before, they just become assets at a certain point. They just become commodities that are trading on a market. And,
Right.
you know, that's the reality of sport. I get that. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's like there does have to be some sort of empathy for that. That isn't just a machine that you are going to sell for X amount of dollars. That is a
Right.
person. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they're not mutually exclusive. This is one of the reasons why I keep talking about the most expensive problems in sports, because if I'm a GM, okay, so I'm a GM of the Seattle Sounders. I live 10 minutes away from where Garth Lagerwey is right now. Garth looks at I know Garth just a little bit, and he looks at numbers. He's looking at the numbers, going,
yep.
what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Now he is banging his head against the wall, going, why is this academy not producing players that are, one, either being sold to Europe, or two, contributing on the first team in a more effective way? And they're trying to solve that problem because it is a financial problem.
Yeah.
If you look at it from an economic standpoint, you look at it as a psychological standpoint, those two can marry each other pretty well, because healthy players that can reach their potential, find joy, happiness, peace, and train at a super, super high level and improve themselves make us a ton of money. So we need to solve that problem. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That's a problem that needs to be solved. The problem is that modern psychology and how it's permeated the sports world and how it treats people psychologically and emotionally is about 20 to 30 years behind the culture. Because it's dominated by a masculine energy. It's dominated by ego. It's dominated by this really old thinking that people are robots and we just program them right and they'll do the right thing. And the truth is there's just an incredible amount of nuance to how the unconscious and how trauma plays into the way these people are developing. And so there has to be attention given to this, and people have to start we have to start thinking of people as a much more a layered third, not just a three-dimensional object.
Yeah.
We got to think 5D if we're going to actually develop athletes well. And then we can actually end up doing both. We can make great money. We can sell players. We can do all this kind of stuff. And we can actually be developing great human beings at the same time. It's possible, but there has to be innovation. There has to be innovative thinking. And the trick is, for guys like me, how do I talk about things like metaphysics and stuff like that, and healing people and helping people transform in a way that's acceptable to the culture where it doesn't get outright rejected.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do you do that? And that's an innovative, hard problem to solve, but it's doable. I mean, that's why I mean, my business is just, I'm helping people over here, and I'm just talking, and I'm just going to keep talking until I die. And we'll see, we'll see who, because at some point, some really smart guy or some really smart girl is going to go, hey, let's just give that a shot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then and of course, when it starts to make financial sense, then people will listen. If somebody goes, wait a minute, why is that academy all of a sudden selling players left and right? Like, what's going on there? I mean, why the entire MLS isn't going to Dallas right now and just studying the FC Dallas Academy, going, how are you guys doing this? We should be putting tremendous amount of resources and just trying to replicate that, because whatever they're doing, it's working. Now we could go even deeper with it and go interview every player they've sold and ask them about their mental and emotional state. And let's track them over the next 10 years and see what actually happens. Do they go to Europe and tank, or do they go to Europe and get better? Well, that says something about the foundation that's being constructed. What if we could create players that have no downside? They only get better, because no matter how much they fail, that makes them better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Create that, and you can't go wrong. You know what I mean?
How do you feel your role would change if you were to actually be, on a staff with a team, right? Like now you're wearing the Seattle Sounders badge versus now where, your only motivation is you just want to help that player that's right in front of you. Do you think that would change at all if you were to then work for a team?
If I was to work for a franchise, and I will at some point, and it's because I'm looking for a laboratory. I need a lab. Yeah. Like first franchise that goes, hey, come on staff with us, I'll be like, I'm in no matter what. And because I've done it all over the place, and I'm seeing this huge rise in these players I'm working with. I want to concentrate it somewhere. I'd love to get a championship ring for like helping people heal. That'd be a cool way to win a championship. You know what I mean? The biggest difference is I'd have to design an educational structure to it, because how do you help players? Like, the players that come to me are looking for help. If you handed me 10 players and said, make these guys into everything they can be, well, most of those guys aren't actively looking for help, and they don't necessarily know they need help. And that's the most important component for someone changing, is they got to know they need to change. Mm-hmm. Right. Anybody who's ever done any therapy or has had struggled with anything, or is any married people out there listening right now are going, yeah, you have to actually eventually go, I think I actually need help. And so educating people about this in a way, I mean, you put me in a room, like if you put me on staff with any franchising, either Sounders or anybody else, if I was to go on staff, the first thing I would do is like, okay, I'm going to put a little bit of a classroom setting, you know, and I'm going to create a very compelling educational structure so that these guys start learning about all their unconscious stuff and how it affects them. So we're going to raise that awareness first. And if that awareness comes in and they step onto the field and they start to feel and experience how their unconscious is coming out there with them, then eventually they might turn around and go, yeah, I think I need some help. And that's most people need it. Most people need it. You know, we're all fooling ourselves into thinking we're good, but MLS is still not a top tier league.
Yeah,
it's not. I mean, we got some world-class players in that league, but it's still not a top tier league. And it's the goal for everybody to get to Europe. Every guy I've worked with, that's the goal. Like eventually they're going, okay, I'm going to go to Europe. And then you get there. Can we get better? We're not, for a country that's the richest country in the world, and there's more people playing soccer here than any other country in the world. We're still not producing world-class players. And that's the goal. Can we do that? So my job would be, if I could get into a franchise, I'm going to start to focus it there. And I don't care what sport it is. Soccer is the world I come from, but I don't care what sport it is. Like, I want to start closing those gaps and proving the value of this deeper work for people, because I think we can show them, the powers that be, that it makes economic sense to become healthy, you know, to become really, really healthy. I mean, I look at guys like Kyrie Irving right now, right, in the NBA. I mean, what he's going through, he's wrestling with this stuff, and whatever. I guarantee he's in therapy, but whatever therapy he's doing, it's not healing him in an effective, efficient way. And I'm not saying it's not helping him. I'm sure it is. Mm-hmm. But I actually think there's a more effective, more efficient way, so that we can literally have big shifts that create new foundations, so that we can really build on it, so that a guy like him can not only find out what he's really capable of, which is scary to think of because he's already so good, but bring joy, peace, happiness into the experience. You know, people keep talking about depression as a disease, as if it's a virus that hits you and it's just never going away. I don't believe that. And I know that because I cured it in myself. Clinical depression for 14 years. And I am not depressed anymore. And I've watched a lot of people change in that way. So yeah, man, I think that I mean, I'm enjoying this because this is an innovative thing. Like, it's fun to wake up and try to solve this problem every day, you know, and I'm just going to keep doing it. And the first franchise that says, come do it with us, I'm going to go, sweet. I'm going to laser focus it right there and see if I can win a championship because of that. Because it's my goal to make everybody go, what the hell is happening over there? I want to be that guy that nobody knows your name, but you're having this huge impact on everything, but nobody knows who you are. You know what I mean?
It's kind of like the Moneyball equivalent, but just like on the complete flip side of it, like the emotional side of it.
Yeah. What was it? Remember the assistant Pete, you know, in that movie? I want to be him. I want to be like, just behind the scenes. It's just, that's literally transforming the way we do things in the world, but nobody really knows who he is. Who's that? That's Pete.
What does he do?
What does he do?
You mentioned Kyrie Irving there, and there's a couple of athletes that spring to mind for me to kind of exemplify this question to you. Is, you know, Ben Simmons is another one that pops into my mind, Simone Biles or Kristen Press, the women's national team. Yeah. Where does the line get drawn for you as for an athlete to maybe actually take a little bit of a break and step away? Because I think Simone Biles was an athlete who, it was really controversial for her to do what she did. You know, she went to the Olympics and took someone else's spot that could have gone and participated, and then said, now I'm going to take a little bit of step away because I need to for my mental health because I'm not okay right now. And she had both sides of the coin. She had people that lauded her for doing something incredible, and other people that, you know, looked at it as a negative. Where do you see as players? Obviously, I think the goal for you is, let me see if you can stay in this and find peace, find joy, and we can work through it that way. But have you ever experienced, hey, maybe actually what's best for you is to do that, to take a little bit of a step away and to find some more peace elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you see, when guys start getting healthy, and I think Shea actually articulated this really well in his interview with you. When guys start getting healthy and women start getting healthy on that fundamental level, you'll see their desires start to kind of shift sometimes. And I've worked with players where it's like, after starting to get healthy, you can see they start going, I think I'm okay being away from this now. And they start seeing their desires going, I really there's a passion start to develop in some other area, whether it's, business or travel or whatever, but they start being able to release that thing. With Simone Biles, it was an interesting one because I think she was dealing with physical safety at some level. I mean, what she's doing is incredibly dangerous. I mean, let's not, it's an incredibly dangerous thing. And she was talking about, she was getting the yips as a gymnast, basically, right? To put that, where a yips as a soccer player, all of a sudden I can't touch the ball well. Or as a baseball player, I had a guy that he couldn't he was a pitcher and he could throw to home at 100 miles an hour, but he couldn't throw to first base. Right. So with her though, she's that trigger is affecting her in midair when she's spinning and flipping, she's going to break her neck. Right. And so a lot of it with her was going, I don't feel safe anymore. You got to get out of there. But the tricky thing is with Simone is that, like, say 4 years earlier, she'd had, instead of being in that top of the world space where the narrative is I'm the GOAT, what if she had been in that, no, there's something here and I can feel it. And she'd started working at that level. You know what I mean? Well, then she would have been able to really transform that experience, right? And it wouldn't have led to that. But it's hard when you're on the top of the world to notice that, Absolutely, about what you're going through. But there's a more awareness. People are starting to talk about it more and more, right? But they still talk about mental health as if it's a brain issue, that when that's only a very small part of it. People, some people, like, I got a buddy of mine, he's a really great therapist, but him and I kind of debate this all the time because he knows it drives me nuts that he talks about brain chemistry constantly, right? And he's like, I know the brain chemistry is not the thing. And I'm like, I know it's not your thing. And I'm like, no, it's not the thing.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody's talking about, well, we need to do something to get your dopamine levels straight or whatever. I'm like, that's not the thing. That's a reactionary thing to something much, much deeper that's going on inside. What was happening to Simone Biles wasn't that. It wasn't mental health. It was mental, emotional, psycho-spiritual health from a deep unconscious space. And you can see I'm just trying to add dimensions to it so that we can see it for the thing it really is, rather than talk about it like it's this kind of shallow little thing that all she needs is to have somebody to talk to and then she'll be okay. It's not true. It's not true at all. But it is something where it is a cool thing that you see people like her stepping out and being willing to speak and being willing to take. That's an incredibly courageous thing for her to Absolutely. Go, I'm going to prioritize my health, my safety over the narrative that's been thrown at me. And of course, give it a year and nobody's going to care anymore. Everybody's gonna be like, she's the greatest that's ever done it. And people let it go. People just get really, really mad at the beginning, like, I was watching this Washington football team, right? They just rebranded the Commanders, right? And everybody on Twitter is freaking out, and all these people, rah, 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 and they're bashing this guy and bashing that guy and bashing Jason Wright and, the president guy, bashing all these people. And I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars and thousands of people and nuance and complexity and research and understanding and native traditions going back thousands of years and voices and all this kind of stuff. And the world tries to boil these people down to these, a soundbite, which is the world we live in now. Right. When the truth is, there's such complexity to how somebody like that functions, how a Kyrie Irving functions and how a Simone Biles functions. And we have to bring sports psychology. We have to drag it into a deeper, more complex art form, which is why I hate the term sports psychology, because they're not different than every other human being. They just live in a different context that is more intense, perhaps. And their trauma is involved in that space, where my buddy's an electrician. He hasn't been an electrician since he was 4 years old and had his parents watching him wire stuff, So it's a different context. It's a different relationship, but it's still, ultimately, we're talking about deep trauma work. And you can see people talking about, I remember Kevin Love talking about how he had a panic attack on the bench in an NBA game. People talking about Michael Phelps, guys that starting to talk about the experience is helping. But for me, it's going, it's still slow though. I just want to, come on, let's get this going there. And part of that's because I'm watching. I mean, when I started doing this at first, even working with guys like Shay, I was realizing some stuff, but what I've learned in the 5 years since then, it's just a giant research project. And I'm learning more and more and more, and I'm stumbling. I remember telling my brother, I said, I feel like I'm stumbling on the blueprint for human beings and how we can work with that, like on this subatomic level. I mean, we're dealing with kind of quantum field level. I mean, because ultimately that's what you're made of. I mean, you're 99% empty space, man. Like you're mostly a bunch of weird magnetic fields that are moving in between waves and the form of waves and particles. And reality is really, really fluid thing. And I think that if we work at that level, we can create pretty dramatic shifts. Really dramatic shifts.
Yeah. My last question for you, because I'm sure I could talk your ear off for hours on end, and
I know, dude.
I
Yeah,
don't want to take
we're
up all
going
your
we're
time.
going Joe Rogan territory here, bud. Yeah.
But along those same lines, and maybe this is a little bit selfishly on my part, but you've explained how you're pushing this agenda forward. Being innovative in this space. For me, as someone that this is something that I would also like to bring light to, on a platform like this. What are the types of things that I can do? Who are the people that I should be bringing on, or what are the stories that I should be sharing to, not only just share the stories of footballers, but also to, shed a light onto the mental side of the game as a whole.
For you, like in
Yeah,
your
for
what you're
this
doing.
show, for what this kind of podcast is.
Yeah. Well, I tell everybody, man, you got to pursue the thing that makes your heart light up,
Mm.
because you'll find that certain conversations do that to you and certain don't. Right. Like that's the thing, even for me, like in the world of therapeutic work, there's everybody needs help. And certain things, when we talk about this kind of thing that this person is going through, I can go, yeah, I can help you with that. But something about working with elite athletes makes me just go, you just explode. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And so I'm like, that's my passion. And everybody needs help. And I am free to choose the spaces that bring the most joy and passion to me, because maybe my mission's there. So you have to, as you do this, how many episodes have you done now?
Just released 53 as of today.
Okay. So, and that's way more than most podcasts make it. So when you make it past 20, you're in it, right? You're
Yeah.
established and you have a body of work now. You have a pretty solid body of work that you can look back and go, man, which conversations lit me up?
Yeah.
And if the ones that really lit you up, just start to nurture that. And if you actually just nurture it with your intention, going, okay, again, I'm kind of bringing the universe into this. Okay, universe, these are the things that I want to have an impact here. And I think I can do it with this form. And I'm going to trust that you're going to start bringing that stuff. And then you start pinging people. You mentioned 10, what is it, about 5 or 6 names of people that are going through stuff with mental health right there. For me, I'm one of those guys who like, there's no celebrity that's too big for me to try
Yeah.
to find a way to talk to them. Right. Like, so you can just start going, how do I get Michael Phelps on this? In the
Yeah.
11 podcast, even though it's a soccer oriented thing, how do I get Kristen Press into this space? How do I start talking about, how do we get Freddie to do and say, Freddie, can we talk about that? I mean, I remember talking to a guy one time, 11 years in the league, never had one cap in the national team and should have. And I remember going, can we talk about, we've talked a lot about what you've done. Can we talk about what you didn't do? And he goes, national team. Yeah. And we had this unbelievable conversation about why he didn't make it. And he was talking about race and he was talking about different stuff. We got into those kind of deep things. If that's what lights you up,
Mm.
then push it. You know what I mean? If what lights you up is, I got a buddy who when he starts talking about soccer tactics, oh my God, he just turns into just a crazy person of just joy and excitement. He's just like, oh my God, he just loves that thing. And he could do a podcast where he just brings coaches on and talks tactics and become an innovator in that area.
Yeah.
And why not? You know what I mean? So for a podcaster, it's a very specific thing, podcasting, right?
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that podcast, and I've been on a ton of podcasts, and some people do it because they're bored, or some people do it because they want to be famous. Some people do it because there's something about the form, about the art form of podcasting itself that really they find beautiful, and they find something drives them into that space. And if you're one of those guys, then now find the conversations that really light you up and focus on those and let go of the other ones. Go, this is what I want, and put it into your bio. We're discussing the development of human beings and how that plays out on the field. And if that's what lights you up, and that's what I would say. And I say it to anybody, like, this is about, part of this is learning how to dream. What's the difference between a dream and a fantasy? Right.
Yeah.
And guys all the time, I go, well, you see people with really active fantasy lives, but they don't even have a dream. Like, yeah, but what do you want? Well, fantasy is just like, I picture myself doing that thing, but it's more like a drug, and it just kind of numbs me out, because I could never really make it, really? Yeah, I'm too old for that, or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what does it look like to have a dream? So if you see yourself going, yeah, I'm going to be the Joe Rogan of the sports world, where I'm bringing all these, and I'm having 2.5-hour conversations with Michael Phelps about what he went through in the Olympics and what he's experiencing now as he ventures forward in his life. And why not, man?
Yeah.
You're obviously a good interviewer. I mean, you're articulate and you got it, man. So just find the conversations that light you up and go there.
I genuinely appreciate that. I really do. So thank you very much for taking some time out of your day. I will. If there's anything that you wanted to, I know obviously there's that book poster in the back there. Anything
Sure.
that you kind of wanted to plug or anything, or let the people know where they can maybe find a little bit more about you?
Well, it's funny. Wrote that book about 7 years ago, but that's there. That's more people dealing with addiction and depression, anxiety, that kind of stuff. But it's called Feels Like Redemption. If you just type my name on Amazon, I've got quite a bit of stuff I've written. But my website, SethAlanTaylor.com, ALAN. I do life coaching, and for now, and if I end up with a franchise, I'm sure I'll forego that part for a while, but I do life coaching with people, not just athletes, and I do mentorship classes from time to time as well, where I teach people about how to do what I do. And that's it. I'm on Facebook. I'm not a big social media guy, but I'm on Facebook if people ever want to just chat. Yeah, I'm here, man. I'm enjoying it, and I just work with whoever comes. So I designed it that way. It takes a while to build a business that way.
Yep.
But once you get to a certain place where everything's referrals and everybody just keeps coming, it's really great because you have a lot of. So I have a lot of freedom.
Spot, yeah.
Yeah. So I have a lot of freedom in my life. So I'm here, man. If people want to work with me, SethAlanTaylor.com, and I'll just keep talking.
Perfect. Love it, man. Thank you so much for sharing everything today. It's been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate it, man. All right.
That was the episode for this week. I know it went a little bit longer than anticipated, but there was just so many questions that I had, and so much that I was learning. Like I said there at the end of the episode, I could have talked for hours on that. And obviously, as you can tell, Seth's passionate about it as well. So it's he could have too. But I hope that everyone was able to learn something from this episode and really gain some value and some insight from someone as knowledgeable as Seth, and someone who's helped so many players at the highest level. So I can't thank Seth enough again for coming on and being in the 11 this week. I can't thank you guys enough for the continued support, the continued growth of this show. It means so much to me. It's incredibly humbling, and I would just encourage you to continue doing what you're doing, to keep listening, to keep supporting, to keep promoting, and I hope to be able to still provide you with awesome guests and awesome stories like Seth has. So thank you so much to all of you out there, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.